to make a soldered band ring, once you've cut, filed, and sanded your metal, form your ring around a ring mandrel using a mallet and your fingers. You want to try to get both ends to touch perfectly. You can also use 2 pliers that are wrapped with tape so you won't scratch your metal, and try to shimmy the 2 ends of the ring together so they touch perfectly and there's no gap between the 2 ends of the ring. Then I suggest you put them on the flat side of an anvil and hit it with a mallet so the ends are touching and it's flattened on that side. You are going to open a 3rd hand pliers by squeezing it and opening the end, and then put your band ring into the pliers so it's holding the ring in place with the seam down. See that? The seam is down on the bottom side. Then I'm going to spray my ring with flux. I have flux in some spray bottles. I'm going to do a couple sprays of the flux and take a small piece of the easy solder. Remember, the solder that's easy is a lower melting temperature. We're going to put a piece of easy solder on the back of the solder seam, furthest away from us on the seam that we want to solder. I'll light my torch. Here I'm using a 180-0 torch, and I'm starting from far away and slowly moving forward as the flux turns white and crusty. So I'm moving my torch up and down the seam. If I get too close too fast, that solder might jump around and move. So I want to get my torch to move closer once the flux turns white and crusty. And then I'm just going to move up and down the seam. I want that piece of easy solder to flow towards me. Solder flows towards the heat. So if the solder is furthest away from me and then I heat this side, the solder should flow towards me right up that seam that I want to close with solder. Once I see the silver solder flow up that seam, I want to quench the whole pliers underwater because it's very hot. So I grab the base of it and quench it underwater. And then I open the pliers and look at my ring. I want to make sure that that seam has that silver line of solder up and down the whole seam. So then I will put my ring in something called a pickle. That's an acid bath that's going to clean the discoloration on the metal that was caused from the torch tip. I'll soak it in the pickle about 5 to 10 minutes and then take it out using the copper tongs only and rinse it in the water at the sink before I touch my metal, okay? So I've got the copper tongs, I rinsed the pickle off my ring, and now I'm just going to dry it. I might need to reform my ring into a perfect circle, so I can certainly do that with a mallet and a ring mandrel. Then I'm going to go to the flex shaft and use 220 sandpaper and carefully hold my ring and sand the outside and the inside of the ring. I really want to sand off as much of the extra solder as I can. If there's a solder puddle on the seam, I want to sand it off as best I can with 220. Then I'm going to switch to 600 on the flex shaft, and holding my ring very carefully, I'm going to sand the outside and the inside of the band ring with 600 sandpaper. I like to take the sandpaper, and as I'm going around the ring, at some point I like to turn the ring and go against the direction of the seam. So here I'm going around the ring on the inside and outside. I like to turn my ring and make sure I hit the outside with the sandpaper going against the seam. There, like that. I'm turning it and I'm going kind of against the seam. That'll kind of erase the seam. Then once I'm done sanding, I can put the ring onto a wooden finger, and I want to hold the wooden finger on both ends. It's tapered, so there's a thinner end and a thicker end. I want to hold the wooden finger on both ends of the wood and press it into the polishing wheel. I'm going to polish it on the red Luxie machine first, and then careful because it gets very hot. We're not touching the metal while we're polishing it. It's on the wooden ring, so it'll get hot. After we do the red Luxie, wash it, and then do the blue Luxie machine. And then you'll have a perfectly polished soldered band ring.